Arabella Vane shoved the Duchess of Blackwood into the lake, and before Eleanor's body resurfaced, the Duke announced that Arabella would soon replace her. Guests stood frozen along the marble terrace as Eleanor sank beneath the lily-dark water, her white skirts twisting around her ankles like grasping hands. No one moved. Then Eleanor broke through the surface with a violent gasp. Blood streaked her sleeve where her palm had struck the stone border. Her wet hair covered half her face, and the pearl comb her mother had given her had vanished beneath the water. She reached for the bank, but the mud crumbled beneath her fingers. "Help her!" an elderly woman cried. The Duke of Blackwood took one step forward. For a single breath, Eleanor believed Julian would come to her. He had seen Arabella's hands strike her back. He had been standing close enough to hear Eleanor's cry. But Arabella clutched his arm. "She attacked me," she whispered. "I only tried to protect myself." Julian stopped. The choice lasted no more than a second, yet Eleanor saw it clearly. He looked at his wife struggling in the water, then at the beautiful woman beside him, and chose the version of events that best served the future he already desired. "It was an accident," he declared. The words silenced the garden. Mr. Hale, the elderly head gardener, pushed through the guests, dropped to his knees, and caught Eleanor beneath the arms. With the help of a footman, he dragged her onto the grass. Eleanor coughed until her ribs ached. Cold water poured from her ivory gown and spread around her like a second lake. No one offered her a cloak. No one dared move while the Duke stood beside Arabella, with her hand still resting possessively upon his sleeve. "You saw her push me," Eleanor said. Her voice was low, but every guest heard it. Julian's jaw tightened. "I saw confusion near the water. You saw her hands against my back." Enough. That single word wounded more deeply than the fall. Eleanor had spent 7 years protecting the Blackwood name. She had negotiated grain prices when Julian's steward failed, persuaded creditors to extend deadlines, and used her marriage portion to keep 3 tenant villages supplied through the winter. She had endured his increasing absences and Arabella's presence at dinners where no unmarried woman should have been seated beside another woman's husband. But Julian had never publicly denied what his own eyes had witnessed. Until now. Arabella touched a handkerchief to the corner of her perfectly dry eyes. "I never wanted Lady Eleanor to be hurt." "Do not call me Lady Eleanor," Eleanor said. "I am still the Duchess of Blackwood." A murmur travelled through the guests. Arabella's expression changed for barely an instant. The frightened innocence disappeared, revealing something cold and triumphant beneath it. Julian stepped between them. Not for much longer. The words struck the garden into silence. Eleanor slowly raised her eyes to his face. Julian had once told her that Blackwood would collapse without her. Now there was no tenderness in his expression, only impatience sharpened by pride. "Our separation agreement will be completed within the week," he announced. "After an appropriate interval, I intend to make Miss Vane my wife." Arabella's lips curved. Eleanor did not weep. She did not plead with the man who had just valued his ambition above her life. Instead, she pushed herself upright, though water filled her shoes and every breath burned inside her chest. As she rose, her fingers caught the strap of a reticule tangled around her wrist. It was not hers. Arabella looked down and went pale. The small velvet bag must have torn free when she shoved Eleanor. Its silver clasp had broken, and several wet papers protruded from the opening. "Give that to me," Arabella demanded. Eleanor opened the reticule. Julian seized her wrist. "Do not cause another scene. Your future bride's property appears to have followed me into the lake," she said to return it, "and you have become remarkably obedient to her." His fingers tightened, but Eleanor pulled free. One sheet of parchment had dissolved into pulp. Another bore rows of figures blurred beyond recognition. The final paper was thicker, folded twice, and marked with the faint remains of a legal seal. Eleanor unfolded it carefully. Most of the ink had vanished, yet 3 words remained legible near the bottom. "Transfer upon death." Her breath caught. She recognized the handwriting. Mr. Ashcombe, Julian's solicitor, formed his capital T with an unusual hooked stroke. Eleanor had seen it on every lease and trust document prepared for the Blackwood estate, yet no agreement concerning a transfer upon anyone's death had ever been shown to her. Arabella lunged for the parchment. Eleanor stepped back. "Whose death?" "It is nothing," Arabella snapped. "A private family matter. Your family has no property administered by my husband's solicitor. Julian took the document from Eleanor and folded it without examining the remaining marks. You will surrender this along with every household key, he said. You will leave Blackwood House before midnight. A faint sound of shock came from the terrace. Eleanor stared at him. You are expelling me from my own home while I am still bleeding. I am preventing further humiliation. No, you are rewarding the woman who tried to kill me. Arabella gave a wounded gasp, but Eleanor no longer looked at her. For the first time, Julian's confidence faltered, not because he doubted Arabella, but because the guests were watching him abandon an injured wife in favor of the woman he intended to install in her place. He lowered his voice. Do not force me to have you removed. Eleanor looked at the man she had once loved and understood that something within their marriage had ended before she ever touched the water. You will not need to remove me, she said, but I will surrender nothing until my solicitor examines the settlement. She turned and walked through the crowd. No one laughed now. At the edge of the garden, Mr. Hale caught up with her and placed his coat around her shoulders. His weathered hands trembled as he glanced back toward Arabella. Your Grace, he whispered. There is something you must know. Eleanor stopped. This morning, Miss Vane asked me how deep the lake was. A cold sensation moved through Eleanor that had nothing to do with her wet gown. Hale swallowed. Then she asked how long a woman might remain beneath the water before no physician could revive her. Behind them, Arabella stood beside the Duke, watching Eleanor with undisguised hatred. Eleanor closed the gardener's coat around herself. The push had not been sudden jealousy. The parchment had not entered Arabella's reticule by chance, and Julian's announcement had not merely followed the attack. It had been waiting for it. Eleanor did not return to the terrace. She crossed the yew walk with Mr. Hale beside her, each step forcing cold lake water from the hem of her gown. Behind them, music resumed with painful uncertainty, as though the Duke's musicians believed a waltz could erase what 50 witnesses had seen. At the servants' entrance, Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, rushed forward with a blanket. Your Grace, you are bleeding. It is only my hand. It is not only your hand. Mrs. Finch wrapped the blanket around Eleanor's shoulders and looked toward the garden. We all heard what His Grace said. Eleanor saw fear in the woman's face. Julian's announcement had not merely displaced a wife. It had warned every servant loyal to her that Blackwood House would soon belong to Arabella. Has Mr. Ashcombe visited the estate this week? Eleanor asked. The housekeeper hesitated. He arrived 2 nights ago, after everyone had retired. Miss Vane met him in the blue drawing room. Was the Duke present? Not when I passed the door. That answer sharpened Eleanor's unease. Julian's solicitor had no reason to meet Arabella privately, and certainly no reason to prepare a document involving a transfer upon death without informing the Duchess, whose marriage settlement controlled much of Blackwood's private income. Eleanor climbed the back staircase to avoid the guests. Her maid, Clara, undressed her with trembling hands and found a deep bruise already darkening between her shoulder blades. She meant to send you over that edge, Clara said. I know. The lake border rose several inches above the lawn. An accidental stumble might have sent Eleanor against the stone. Arabella had pushed hard enough to throw her beyond it. Clara helped her into a plain wool gown. Will you truly leave tonight? If I remain, the Duke may use my refusal as evidence that I am unreasonable. If I leave without protecting the settlement records, Arabella may destroy them before morning. Eleanor crossed to the writing desk and unlocked the lower drawer. Inside lay 3 tenant ledgers, correspondence from the estate physician, and copies of the grain contracts she had negotiated during the winter shortage. The blue leather portfolio containing her marriage settlement was missing. She searched the second drawer, then the cabinet near the hearth. Clara, who has entered this room today? No one except me. The door was locked while you were in the garden. Who holds another key? Mrs. Finch, His Grace, and Mr. Bellamy. Thomas Bellamy had served as Julian's steward for 4 years. He was efficient, deferential, and always careful to provide Eleanor with precisely the figures she requested. Until 3 months ago, those figures had balanced. Recently, several rent payments had arrived late, and 2 repair accounts contained charges Eleanor could not verify. When she questioned Bellamy, Julian accused her of distrusting everyone who served him. Now her settlement had vanished on the same day Arabella tried to drown her. Eleanor opened the tenant ledger Her father, a shipping merchant, had taught her never to trust a total until she understood the entries beneath it. Numbers were merely stories stripped of emotion. They revealed where goods moved, who benefited, and who had lied. She ran her finger down the column of spring rents. 7 farms on the northern boundary showed unexplained arrears. All 7 were occupied by widows or families without adult sons, people least able to challenge an eviction. "They are selecting the weakest tenants," she murmured. Clara leaned closer. "Who is?" "I do not yet know." A knock sounded. Julian entered before Eleanor granted permission. His garden coat had been replaced, and no trace of disorder remained upon him. He looked every inch the Duke of Blackwood, controlled, elegant, and accustomed to obedience. Only the damp parchment in his hand betrayed what had happened. "You should be resting," he said. "You ordered me from the house before midnight. Rest would be an inefficient use of the hours remaining." His mouth tightened. Must every conversation become a contest? "You announced your intention to replace me while I was struggling to breathe. What tone would you prefer?" Clara lowered her eyes, but Eleanor saw the maid's hands clench. Julian placed the damaged document upon the desk. "The words you saw concern a proposed transfer of Miss Vane's family property. They have nothing to do with you." "Then why was Mr. Ashcombe's seal upon it?" "He advises many families, not Arabella's. You are searching for a conspiracy because you cannot accept that our marriage has ended." Eleanor looked at him carefully. "Did you know," she asked Mr. Hale, "how long a woman could survive beneath the lake?" For the first time, genuine surprise crossed his face. Then he looked away. She was planning improvements to the garden. She asked about drowning. "You have the frightened recollection of an old servant and a ruined page you had no right to read. You saw her push me." Silence filled the room. Eleanor waited. This was his opportunity, the clear moment in which he could question Arabella, delay the separation, or protect the woman still legally his wife. Instead, he removed a ring of keys from his pocket and set it beside the parchment. "At 11, Bellamy will inventory these rooms. You will surrender the household keys, the estate ledgers, and every document belonging to Blackwood. These ledgers concern families whose leases I administer under the settlement. You no longer administer anything. Has Arabella asked for that authority?" "I offered it." The answer explained more than he understood. By transferring Eleanor's household authority to Arabella, Julian would give her access to the rent books, servants' records, private correspondence, medicine cabinets, and every locked room in the house. He would hand the suspected architect of Eleanor's death the means to erase the evidence. Eleanor closed the tenant ledger. "I will surrender the household keys. I will not surrender records covered by my father's trust until my solicitor reviews them." Julian's expression hardened. "Your father's money saved Blackwood once. It did not purchase the right to govern me. No. My work purchased the right to recognize when you are being governed by someone else." He turned toward the door, then stopped. "Arabella will occupy the east apartments from tonight. You are not to approach her or speak to the guests again." Those were Eleanor's apartments, the rooms renovated with her mother's inheritance, adjoining the private archive where the settlement copies had been stored. The humiliation in the garden had served a practical purpose. Arabella had not merely wanted Eleanor gone from the party. She needed access to those rooms before Eleanor discovered what had been taken. After Julian left, Eleanor waited until his footsteps faded. Then she removed a small brass key from the ribbon beneath her collar. Julian knew about the household keys. Bellamy knew about the desk key, but neither man knew that Eleanor's father had commissioned a narrow iron cabinet behind the old chapel panel, where duplicate contracts and sealed correspondence could survive fire or theft. "Clara, pack only what we can carry," she said. "Then ask Mr. Hale to bring the pony cart to the chapel entrance." "Are we leaving through the chapel?" "Not yet." Eleanor lifted the candle and opened the concealed panel. The iron cabinet stood inside, but its door was already open. The contracts remained untouched. So did the copies of the tenants' leases. Only one envelope was missing, the sealed letter her father had instructed her to open if anyone ever attempted to remove her from Blackwood. In its place lay a fresh white lily, dripping with lake water. Eleanor stared at the white lily until a drop of lake water fell from its stem and struck the iron shelf. Someone had discovered a hiding place known only to her, her late father, and the craftsman who had installed the cabinet 7 years earlier. The craftsman had died before Eleanor's wedding, Her father had been buried 3 winters ago, yet the cabinet stood open, and the one letter meant to protect her had vanished. Clara crossed herself. Miss Vane put that there. Perhaps. But Arabella could not have opened this cabinet without help. Eleanor lifted the flower by its stem. A dark thread clung to one torn petal, not black, as she first thought, but deep blue, the same shade as the livery worn by Blackwood's senior indoor servants. Arabella had access to Julian and Mr. Ashcombe, but someone inside the household had brought her to the chapel panel, or taken the letter on her behalf. What was in the envelope? Clara asked. I do not know. My father forbade me to open it, unless my position here became unsafe. Being thrown into a lake seems unsafe enough. Eleanor almost smiled, but the movement hurt her bruised ribs. She set the lily on the chapel table and searched the cabinet. The remaining papers had been disturbed. A copy of the Northern farm leases rested above the grain contracts, though Eleanor always stored it beneath them. Whoever had taken the letter had examined the other documents first. Then she noticed a thin layer of pale red dust inside the cabinet lock. Eleanor touched it with one finger. Brick powder, she said. The old chapel was built of grey stone. The main house used cream limestone. Only one building on the estate contained red brick, the disused counting house beside the northern granary, where Thomas Bellamy kept obsolete rent books before they were burned or pulped. The steward's coat was deep blue. That was not proof, but it was direction. Eleanor closed the panel and turned to Clara. Pack 2 gowns, my writing case, and nothing bearing the Blackwood crest. Tell no one about the cabinet. What will you do? Find out whether Bellamy has been preparing to remove more than a duchess. She left the chapel by the servants' passage, keeping the lily hidden inside a linen cloth. The corridors were unusually quiet. Most of the servants had been ordered to attend the garden party, leaving the eastern wing nearly deserted. As Eleanor approached her apartments, she heard men's voices beyond the half-open door. Bellamy stood at her desk with 2 footmen beside him. A wooden inventory case lay open at his feet, though it was not yet 11. You were told to wait, Eleanor said. The footman stepped back immediately. Bellamy did not. He was a tall, narrow man, whose mild expression had always made him seem more like a clergyman than a steward. Now his eyes moved briefly to the ribbon at Eleanor's throat, as if checking for the brass key she had already concealed in her pocket. His Grace requested that I begin without delay, he said. Did His Grace also request that you open my private correspondence? Bellamy's hand rested upon a stack of letters. All documents produced within this house belong to the estate. My mother's letters do not. I regret the misunderstanding. No, Mr. Bellamy. You regret being interrupted. The footmen exchanged glances. Eleanor understood at once that Bellamy had expected her to retreat in shame after the garden. Instead, she had caught him searching her rooms before the Duke's stated hour. That small victory mattered. 2 servants had witnessed it, and witnesses were harder to erase than documents. She walked to the desk and placed her hand over the tenant ledger. Where is my marriage settlement portfolio? I have not seen it. You possessed a duplicate key to this room, for administrative necessity, and did that necessity bring you here before 11? A pulse moved in his cheek. You appear distressed, Your Grace. Perhaps the lake has left you confused. The insult was carefully chosen. If Eleanor protested too loudly, Bellamy could describe her as hysterical. If she remained silent, he would continue dismantling the records that protected her. She turned to the footman. Mr. Price, Mr. Dawson, you both heard the Duke state that the inventory would begin at 11. Yes, Your Grace, Price answered reluctantly. And you see that the clock reads 20 minutes past 9? Yes, Your Grace. Bellamy's composure thinned. Eleanor removed the ledger from the desk. You may inventory the furniture at 11. Until then, you will leave my rooms. His Grace has transferred household authority to Miss Vane. Not yet. I remain Duchess of Blackwood, and Miss Vane remains an unmarried guest who assaulted me in front of witnesses. Leave. For a moment, Eleanor expected him to refuse. Then Bellamy bowed and signaled the footmen to follow him. At the threshold, he glanced back. His gaze fell upon the folded linen in Eleanor's hand. A trace of recognition entered his face before he concealed it. He knew about the lily. Eleanor waited until the corridor fell silent, then opened the ledger again. She had marked the questionable northern rents with tiny dots beside each family name. The dots were still present, but 3 pages had been replaced. The paper appeared identical, yet the copied handwriting lacked the faint rightward slope of Eleanor's original entries. Someone had rewritten the accounts to show that the widowed tenants owed almost a year's rent. Under Blackwood custom, such arrears allowed the steward to petition for eviction. Once the leases were terminated, the farms could be transferred or pledged without resistance from long-established families. Eleanor examined the stitching along the spine. The replacement pages had been sewn with green silk rather than ordinary linen thread. It was a foolish extravagance unless the person repairing the book had used whatever happened to be close at hand. Earlier that afternoon, Arabella had worn a pale green gown embroidered with matching silk. Eleanor wrapped the ledger in plain cloth and handed it to Clara. "Take this to the pony cart. Do not let it out of your hands." Before Clara could leave, voices rose in the courtyard below. Eleanor crossed to the window. 3 wagons stood beside the east entrance. Servants were unloading Arabella's trunks, paintings, French furniture, and silver chests, as if she had already become mistress of Blackwood House. Near the final wagon, 2 men carried a long iron-bound box, stamped with the crest of Harcourt and Vale. Eleanor recognized the name. Harcourt and Vale was not a furniture maker. It was the London creditor, whose emblem had appeared on notices sent to distressed landowners shortly before their properties were seized. Bellamy emerged into the courtyard and directed the men toward the private archive. Arabella had not arrived with gowns alone. She had brought representatives of a creditor into Blackwood House, hidden among her servants. Then Eleanor saw Julian approach. Bellamy handed him a folded document and indicated where he should sign. Julian did not read it. He placed the paper against the side of the wagon and wrote his name, while Arabella watched from the steps. The creditor's men immediately lifted the iron-bound box and carried it inside. Eleanor's father had taught her that possession created leverage, but a signature created law. If Julian had just granted Harcourt and Vale access to the archive, the estate's private debts, leases, and securities were no longer protected. Clara followed Eleanor's gaze. "Can you stop them?" "Not by asking my husband. He has decided that every warning from me is jealousy." "What then?" Eleanor looked at the altered ledger in Clara's arms. "We preserve what they have not yet destroyed." A small figure appeared beneath the window. It was Samuel Reed, the 12-year-old son of a northern tenant widow. His boots were muddy, and he clutched a crumpled notice against his chest. When he saw Eleanor, he pulled off his cap. "Your Grace," he called, breathless. "They have given Mother until tomorrow to leave our farm. Mr. Bellamy says the Duke sold the northern fields this morning." Eleanor's fingers tightened against the window frame. "The Duke cannot sell those farms," she said. "They form part of my marriage trust." Samuel looked toward the men entering the archive. "The notice says the trust no longer exists." Eleanor was downstairs before Samuel could call her name again. She crossed the courtyard without a bonnet or cloak, ignoring the sting of cold air against her damp hair, and took the eviction notice from his shaking hands. The boy's mother, Mrs. Reed, had occupied Willow Farm since her husband died in a quarry accident 6 years earlier. Eleanor had personally renewed the lease and paid for the drainage channels that turned its flooded fields into productive pasture. The notice now claimed that Mrs. Reed owed 11 months' rent and must surrender the property by noon the following day. At the bottom appeared Thomas Bellamy's signature, the seal of Harcourt and Vale, and a statement that the farms had been released from Eleanor's marriage trust by authority of the Duke of Blackwood. "Did your mother receive any warning before today?" Eleanor asked. "No, Your Grace. Mr. Bellamy's men came while she was milking. They said they would throw our furniture into the road if we were still there tomorrow." Samuel looked toward the open archive door. "Mother sent me, because you promised no family would lose its home without being heard." Eleanor had made that promise at her first tenants' assembly, when she still believed Julian and she would govern Blackwood together. Now her husband had signed away the protection she had built, and innocent families would suffer before he understood what he had done. "Go to the old schoolhouse," she told Samuel. "Ask Reverend Cole to open it for every family who has received a notice. Tell them not to resist Bellamy's men with violence and not to sign anything. I will come before dark. Will we lose the farm?" "Not tomorrow." She could promise no more, but the certainty in her voice steadied him. Samuel ran toward the stable lane, just as Arabella descended the east steps, wearing a dry, rose-colored gown. She carried Eleanor's household keys at her waist. "How touching," Arabella said. The discarded Duchess, still receiving petitions. Eleanor folded the eviction notice and placed it inside her sleeve. Those keys were not Julian's to give before the inventory. His Grace disagrees. His Grace also believes your family property is being transferred through his solicitor. Yet the men unloading your trunks represent Harcourt and Vale. Arabella's smile remained, but her fingers closed around the keys. "You have always mistaken account-keeping for intelligence, and you have mistaken my husband's vanity for protection." The words landed. Arabella stepped closer, lowering her voice so the servants could not hear. "You should have remained beneath the water." Eleanor felt the bruise between her shoulders pulse, but she did not retreat. "You should have made certain your reticule remained closed." For the first time, fear broke through Arabella's composure. She recovered quickly and turned toward the archive. "Mr. Bellamy, the Duchess is interfering with the removal." Bellamy appeared in the doorway with two creditors' men behind him. One carried a stack of leather portfolios from the private shelves. Eleanor recognized the topmost volume as the original register of the Northern leases. "Put those records down," she ordered. Bellamy bowed without obeying. "His Grace has authorized their examination." "Examination does not require removal. The creditors must verify which properties secure the advance. There is no lawful advance against land held under my father's trust. That matter has already been resolved." He produced a document bearing Julian's signature. Before Eleanor could take it, Arabella plucked the page from his hand and held it beyond her reach. "You will see everything after you leave," she said. "If there is anything left to see," Eleanor replied. Julian entered the courtyard at that moment, accompanied by Mr. Ashcombe. The solicitor was a nervous, soft-handed man whose eyes moved immediately from Eleanor to the document in Arabella's grasp. He looked alarmed to find them confronting one another. "Julian," Eleanor said, "Bellamy has issued false eviction notices against the Northern tenants and admitted representatives of Harcourt and Vale into your archive. Stop the removal until the trust documents are examined." Julian glanced at Samuel's retreating figure. "Bellamy informed me that several tenants are seriously in arrears. The original ledger showed no such arrears. 3 pages have been replaced." "According to whom?" "According to the woman who entered every payment." Bellamy sighed as though burdened by her irrationality. "Your Grace, the Duchess frequently amended those books without witnesses. It is possible she concealed the debts to exaggerate the success of her management." Eleanor turned to him, "Then produce the receipts. Several are missing." "Because you removed them? Because you controlled them?" The trap became clear. Bellamy had altered the ledger, stolen the receipts, and arranged matters so Eleanor's years of work could be portrayed as fraud. Arabella needed her expelled before the creditors compared forged arrears with the tenant accounts. Julian had been offered a choice in her bedchamber. Now he was being offered another before witnesses. He could pause. He could ask for the original bank deposits. He could question why Arabella's creditor had arrived before the separation agreement was complete. Instead, he looked at Eleanor with weary resentment. "You will stop obstructing my steward. Those farms are protected by my settlement." Mr. Ashcombe cleared his throat. "There may have been a recent amendment." Eleanor faced him. "Prepared by you?" The solicitor's face lost colour. "I prepared a draft under instruction." "Whose instruction?" Arabella answered before he could. "Your husband's." Eleanor held Julian's gaze. "Did you instruct Mr. Ashcombe to dissolve my father's trust?" "I instructed him to release the Northern property for refinancing." "Without my consent." "Your consent was deemed unnecessary by the solicitor who secretly met Arabella 2 nights ago." Julian's expression changed, but Ashcombe hurried forward. "The meeting concerned Miss Vane's future household arrangements, nothing more." Eleanor pointed toward the creditor's box being carried into the archive. "Then why did she bring Harcourt and Vale to Blackwood before Julian announced our separation?" No one answered. One of the creditor's men shifted his grip, and a smaller book slid from beneath his coat and struck the courtyard stones. Its clasp burst open. Dozens of payment receipts scattered across the ground. Samuel Reed's family name appeared on the first. Eleanor knelt and seized it before Bellamy could reach her. The receipt showed every month paid in full. More receipts bore the names of the supposedly indebted widows. Bellamy had not destroyed the evidence. He had collected it to prevent the tenants from disproving his account. "There," Eleanor said. holding the receipt toward Julian. "You have the truth in your own courtyard." Arabella's eyes darted to Bellamy. He reacted instantly. Those papers were found in the Duchess's cabinet. She must have hidden them to conceal her interference. It was an imperfect lie, delivered quickly enough to exploit Julian's anger. Eleanor expected her husband to reject it. He knew she had spent years protecting those families. He knew Bellamy's men had been caught carrying the receipts out of the archive. But Julian stared at the documents, then at the guests gathering near the terrace, and pride conquered reason once more. "Mrs. Finch," he called, "send for the magistrate." Eleanor slowly rose. "Why?" His face became colder than the lake. "Because until these accounts are examined, you are no longer merely leaving Blackwood. You are accused of falsifying estate records and concealing rent payments from your husband." Arabella smiled as the last drops of water fell from Eleanor's hair onto the receipt in her hand. But Eleanor noticed something none of them had seen. Every supposedly hidden receipt carried a red wax mark from the northern counting house, and pressed faintly into that wax was the edge of Bellamy's signet ring. Eleanor closed her fingers around the receipt before Bellamy could see where her attention had settled. The wax impression was incomplete, no more than a crescent crossed by two narrow lines. But she had watched the steward seal hundreds of estate notices with the same signet. If the receipts had truly been concealed in her private cabinet, Bellamy's mark had no reason to be upon them. She needed time to preserve that contradiction. Yet Julian had just summoned a magistrate who might place every document under the steward's control. "Clara," Eleanor said without turning, "take Samuel to Mrs. Finch and see that he is given something warm." Clara understood the hidden instruction. The altered ledger remained wrapped beneath her arm, and removing it from the courtyard would keep at least one record beyond Bellamy's reach. She had taken only 2 steps when Arabella blocked her path. "The maid is carrying estate property." "She is carrying my clothing," Eleanor replied. "Then she will not object to being searched." Arabella reached for the bundle, but Eleanor caught her wrist. A murmur rose from the servants. Eleanor did not squeeze or strike. She merely held Arabella still and spoke so everyone could hear. "You pushed me into the lake once today. If you touch my maid, you will explain both acts before the magistrate." Arabella's eyes flashed. "Release me." "Gladly." "Eleanor, let go." Clara hurried away with Samuel, while Julian watched in rigid silence. He had to know Eleanor had protected something, but stopping a frightened maid before the household would make his treatment of his wife appear even uglier. His hesitation gave Clara the few seconds she needed to disappear beneath the servant's arch. Bellamy bent to gather the scattered receipts. Eleanor placed one shoe over the page, bearing Mrs. Reed's name. "This remains with me. It belongs to the estate," he said. "It proves that a tenant you intend to evict has paid every farthing. It proves only that a receipt exists, a receipt marked by your signet." His hand stopped. Arabella's face remained composed, but Mr. Ashcombe looked sharply at Bellamy. That reaction told Eleanor the solicitor had not known every part of the scheme. He might have prepared the transfer document, but Bellamy had altered the rents without fully informing him. The alliance surrounding Julian was not seamless. Fear and greed had merely bound its members together for the moment. Julian extended his hand. "Give me the receipt." Eleanor looked at him. "Will you keep it from Bellamy?" "Do not question my honor. I question your judgment. Your honor will be measured by what you do after being shown the truth." His face darkened. "You stand accused in my courtyard and still speak to me as though I were your clerk. If you had examined a single account before signing away the northern farms, I would not need to." The guests near the terrace fell utterly silent. Eleanor knew she had wounded his pride publicly, and pride was the weakness Arabella had cultivated from the beginning. Julian had grown weary of hearing that his estate survived through his merchant-born wife's money and skill. Arabella offered him a different story, that he had always been powerful, that Eleanor controlled him through obligation, and that casting her aside would prove his independence. Eleanor saw that story take possession of him now. "You will surrender the receipt," he said, "or I shall authorize Bellamy to take it. Then you will be authorizing the accused man to seize evidence against himself." Bellamy stepped forward. "This is intolerable." "Yes," Eleanor replied. "Truth often is." A carriage rolled beneath the gate before the confrontation could deepen. The local magistrate, Sir Matthew Langford, emerged with his clerk. He was a broad, grey-haired man who had dined at Blackwood twice and owed Julian considerable political favour. Eleanor did not expect impartiality, but neither could he lawfully condemn her on Bellamy's unsupported accusation. Sir Matthew surveyed her plain gown, wet hair, and bruised hand, then glanced at Arabella, standing beside the Duke with Eleanor's keys at her waist. Whatever explanation he had received on the journey had not prepared him for that picture. "Blackwood," he said carefully. "I was told there had been a theft of estate income." "More than theft," Bellamy answered. "Her Grace falsified ledgers, concealed tenant payments, and obstructed the lawful refinancing of the northern farms." "Her Grace?" Sir Matthew repeated. "You accuse the Duchess?" "I do," Julian said. Eleanor felt something inside her become still. Bellamy might lie to save himself. Arabella might lie to gain a title, but Julian was not speaking under confusion now. He stood before servants, tenants, guests, a solicitor, and a magistrate, with evidence in Eleanor's hand and doubt visible on Ashcombe's face. He could have requested an audit. He could have delayed the transfer for a single day. Instead, he chose to turn suspicion into a formal accusation because admitting uncertainty would humiliate him before Arabella. Sir Matthew removed his gloves. "Where are the account books?" "The Duchess removed one," Bellamy said. "The remainder are in the archive." "I removed nothing," Eleanor replied. "My maid carried my personal belongings away after Miss Vane attempted to search her without authority. And the receipt beneath your shoe." She lifted her foot and handed the page directly to the magistrate. "Mrs. Reed's rent was paid in full. Mr. Bellamy's ledger claims otherwise. You will find a partial impression of his signet in the wax." Sir Matthew examined it. Bellamy forced a laugh. "Naturally, my signet appears there. I supervise the collection of rents." "Then why did you say the receipts had been hidden in my cabinet?" Eleanor asked. "If they passed through your hands, when did you last see them?" Bellamy's answer came half a breath too late. "At the spring audit." "There was no spring audit. You persuaded the Duke to postpone it until Michaelmas." Sir Matthew's brows drew together. Eleanor had created the first visible break in Bellamy's story. Julian saw it too. She knew by the tightening of his mouth. Yet Arabella slipped her hand through his arm and whispered something Eleanor could not hear. His uncertainty vanished. "The Duchess has always managed the books," he told the magistrate. "If there are irregularities, she had both the access and the knowledge to create them." That statement destroyed the last protection his wife possessed. A husband's public accusation carried enormous weight, especially when the wife had overseen the very records in dispute. Sir Matthew looked regretful, rather than convinced. "Until the accounts are secured and examined, I must ask Her Grace to remain where she can be reached." "She was already ordered to leave Blackwood," Arabella said quickly. "Then, the West Hunting Lodge," Julian replied. "It stands beyond the inner gates and has a resident keeper. She may remain there, under supervision." Eleanor looked at him in disbelief. The lodge was damp, isolated, and nearly 3 miles from the main house. More importantly, placing her there would prevent her from warning the northern tenants or reaching the bank before the creditors' transfer was completed. "You are confining me while Bellamy retains the records I'm accused of altering. I am preventing you from interfering further and giving him the night to replace whatever he has not yet forged." "Enough." Julian took a document from Mr. Ashcombe's case. "You have forced this upon yourself." Ashcombe caught his sleeve. "Your Grace, that is the authority transfer. It was prepared as a draft. I advise against signing until the trust language has been reviewed." For the first time, the solicitor openly resisted. Julian glanced toward the watching guests, then at Eleanor. She saw the moment when he could still stop. "Read it," she said quietly. "If you ever trusted me, read what they have placed before you." Arabella's hand tightened on his arm. "If you delay now, Harcourt and Vale will withdraw the advance, and everyone will know your wife still governs Blackwood." Julian's face hardened. He took the pen Bellamy offered and signed the document without reading a single line. Bellamy exhaled. Arabella smiled. Mr. Ashcombe closed his eyes. With that signature, Julian transferred control of the household accounts, archive, northern leases, and estate correspondence to Arabella and Bellamy until the accusations against Eleanor were resolved. He had not merely rejected his wife, He had placed every means of proving her innocence into the hands of those who needed her silenced. Sir Matthew's clerk approached to escort her to the waiting carriage, but Eleanor raised her uninjured hand. "I will go without force." She turned to Julian one final time. "When Blackwood begins to fall, remember that you were asked to read before you signed." He did not answer. As the carriage carried her toward the hunting lodge, Eleanor watched the manor disappear behind the trees. She had lost her rooms, her authority, her access to the archives, and the protection of her husband's name. But Clara still held the altered ledger. Reverend Cole would soon gather the threatened tenants, and Mrs. Reed's receipt had passed into the magistrate's custody rather than Bellamy's. Most importantly, Eleanor had seen the words that remained visible above Julian's signature before the document was folded away: full authority to pledge, transfer, or discharge. Bellamy could now pledge the Northern Farms before morning, but the Northern Farms were not his true objective. Her father's missing letter had warned of a transfer upon death, and the person whose death would release every restriction upon the Blackwood Trust was not Julian, it was Eleanor. The hunting lodge had not been prepared for habitation. Dust lay thick upon the tables. Rain had stained the ceiling above the narrow bed, and the hearth contained only damp wood that smoked instead of burning. Sir Matthew's clerk remained outside the door, while the resident keeper, Mr. Pritchard, stood uneasily in the passage and apologized for conditions he had received no time to improve. Eleanor assured him that she did not blame him, then waited until he left before examining the room. One window overlooked the road to Blackwood House. The other faced the northern fields. Both had been nailed nearly shut. Julian might call this supervision, but Arabella had chosen a place where Eleanor could neither summon help nor escape quickly if another accident occurred. She pulled a chair beneath the door handle, removed Mrs. Reed's eviction notice from her seat, and studied its seal by candlelight. The Harcourt and Vale emblem appeared crisp, but the date above it had been written 3 days earlier, before Julian claimed to have approved the refinancing. Bellamy and Arabella had prepared the evictions before securing the Duke's signature, confident that his wounded pride would make him sign whatever they placed before him. A soft tapping sounded against the northern window. Eleanor extinguished the candle and approached carefully. Clara's face appeared beyond the glass. Mr. Hale stood behind her, holding a small ladder, while Samuel waited below with a covered basket. Eleanor raised the sash as far as the nails allowed. "The clerk is watching the front door," Clara whispered. "Reverend Cole has gathered 8 families at the schoolhouse. More notices are arriving by the hour." She passed the altered ledger through the gap, followed by Eleanor's writing case and a dry cloak. Mrs. Finch also sent this. Inside the basket lay bread, cheese, a flask of hot tea, and a folded sheet of paper. Eleanor recognized the housekeeper's precise handwriting. "Bellamy has dismissed Price and Dawson. The archive fire has been lit, though the evening is warm. Miss Vane ordered every servant to surrender private keys. Mr. Ashcombe attempted to leave, but his carriage horses were removed." Eleanor read the message twice. Arabella was closing the house, isolating witnesses, and preparing to destroy records before the magistrate's examination. "We need the bank deposits," Eleanor said. "The altered ledger proves pages were changed, but the bank's receipts will show the rents were paid." "The bank in Ashbourne closes at 4, Clara replied. "It is nearly 6. Then we need Mr. Fenwick, the manager. My father trusted him." Mr. Hale shook his head. "The main road is watched. Bellamy placed men at the northern gate and told them no tenant is to leave the estate." The scheme had moved beyond forged accounts. By sealing the roads and evicting vulnerable families, Bellamy was clearing the land before anyone could challenge the transfer. Eleanor opened the ledger and compared the false entries with the notice. 7 farms had been marked first, but a faint indentation continued down the following page. She placed the paper over the candle's sidelight and saw the pressure marks of 12 additional names. 19 farms in total formed a continuous strip between the northern road and the river. "They are not seizing farms at random," she said. "They are building a corridor." Samuel looked up from below. A corridor to where? Eleanor pictured the estate map her father had taught her to memorize. The northern road led to the abandoned stone quarry. Beyond it, the river joined a proposed canal route that Parliament had debated the previous year. If Harcourt and Vale controlled both sides of that route before the canal bill passed, the nearly worthless farms would multiply in value. Arabella was not merely trying to become a duchess. She and Bellamy intended to acquire the northern land cheaply, then profit when the canal was announced. Eleanor's trust prevented any sale without strict conditions, and Eleanor herself was the one person likely to recognize the pattern. "Mr. Hale, can you reach Ashbourne through the old quarry path?" she asked. "On foot, perhaps. Not with a horse. Take Samuel and this note to Mr. Fenwick. Ask him to bring certified copies of every Blackwood tenant deposit from the last 12 months directly to Sir Matthew. Do not bring them here. If Bellamy's men catch you, the records must not be found on Blackwood land," she wrote quickly, sealing the message with the small personal stamp she kept in her writing case. Before handing it over, she added a phrase her father and Mr. Fenwick had used in private correspondence. "The tide book must be balanced before the ship sails." It would prove the request came from her. Samuel slipped the note inside his boot, and Mr. Hale led him into the darkness. Clara remained beside the window. "I am staying with you." "No. Return to the schoolhouse. Copy every false entry from this ledger and have each tenant write or mark what they actually paid. Reverend Cole can witness their statements, but you will be alone." Eleanor looked toward the front door, where the clerk's shadow moved across the frosted glass. "They believe isolation makes me powerless. Let them continue believing it." Clara hesitated, then squeezed Eleanor's hand through the narrow opening and took the ledger away. Minutes after she disappeared, carriage wheels approached along the front road. Eleanor expected Julian or Sir Matthew. Instead, Bellamy entered with 2 unfamiliar men and a physician, carrying a leather case. "Her Grace suffered a prolonged immersion," Bellamy told the clerk. "The Duke is concerned that fever has disturbed her judgment." The physician introduced himself as Dr. Mercer. Eleanor knew every practitioner within 20 miles, yet she had never seen him before. "Who engaged you?" she asked. "Miss Vane, on behalf of His Grace." He removed a dark bottle from his case. "A sleeping draught will calm you." Eleanor recognized the bitter scent before he uncorked it. Laudanum, and far too much for an ordinary restorative. If she drank it, she might remain unconscious while Bellamy completed the transfer, or never wake at all. "I decline." Bellamy produced a folded order bearing Julian's signature. "His Grace authorizes treatment necessary for your safety." Eleanor looked at the signature. It was genuine, but the ink had bled around the final stroke, as though written on damp paper. Julian had signed it in the courtyard, believing it to be one of the documents Bellamy placed before him. The authority transfer had concealed a second page. "The Duke did not read this order," she said. "That does not invalidate it," Bellamy replied. "Doctor." Mercer poured the laudanum into a cup and diluted it with water. "You may take it willingly, Your Grace, or these gentlemen will assist you." Eleanor backed toward the hearth, calculating the distance to the iron poker. 3 men stood between her and the door. The clerk looked troubled, but lacked the courage to oppose an order carrying the Duke's name. "If I am too confused to manage my own health," Eleanor said loudly, "then I am too confused to confess to financial crimes. You cannot use my illness when it serves you, and my supposed guilt when it does not." Bellamy's mild expression vanished. "Hold her." One man seized Eleanor's arms while the other gripped her jaw. She kicked the cup from Mercer's hand, splashing the draught across the floor. The physician cursed and reached for the bottle. At that instant, bells began ringing in the direction of Blackwood House. Not the chapel's call to prayer, but the rapid, violent alarm used for fire. Bellamy turned toward the window. An orange glow rose above the trees, spreading from the eastern wing where the archive stood. The records were burning. Then another sound followed, distant shouts from the northern fields and the thunder of horses on the road. A rider appeared outside the lodge, his coat torn and his face blackened by smoke. It was Price, the dismissed footman. He struck the door with both fists. "Your Grace, Harcourt's men have locked the archive from the outside. Mr. Ashcombe and Mrs. Finch are trapped inside." Bellamy's men loosened their grip. Eleanor tore free, seized the iron poker, and faced the steward. "You wanted the records destroyed," she said. "But if those witnesses die with them, this will no longer be an accusation of fraud." Bellamy's eyes flicked toward the burning house. For the first time he looked afraid. "It will be murder." Eleanor did not wait for Bellamy's permission. She struck the lodge window with the iron poker. shattered the lower pane, and tore away the remaining glass with the edge of her cloak. "Price, take my hand." The footman pulled her through the opening, while the magistrate's clerk shouted that she was violating the Duke's order. Bellamy rushed toward the door, but Dr. Mercer caught his sleeve. "If the solicitor dies, he cannot confirm what he signed," the physician hissed. Eleanor heard the warning and stored it with every other fracture forming inside their alliance. She mounted Price's exhausted horse, dragged her wet skirts clear of the stirrup, and rode toward Blackwood House, with the footman clinging behind her. Flames showed through the eastern windows before they reached the inner gate. Servants ran across the lawn carrying buckets, but Harcourt's men had blocked the archive entrance with a fallen cabinet and claimed the smoke made rescue impossible. Julian stood near the fountain, shouting orders no one could follow. The estate pumps had not been maintained because Bellamy had diverted the repair funds, and only a weak stream emerged from the leather hose. Another consequence of trusting the wrong man had arrived in fire and smoke. "The chapel passage," Eleanor called as she dismounted. Julian turned, stunned to see her. "What are you doing here?" "Saving the people your signature placed in danger." She ran toward the chapel before he could stop her. The concealed passage behind the old vestry connected to a narrow service corridor running behind the archive wall. Eleanor had discovered it while cataloguing family papers years earlier. Bellamy knew of the cabinet panel, but he did not know the passage continued beyond it, because a bookcase concealed the second door. Price followed her into the chapel. Julian came after them, coughing as smoke rolled beneath the ceiling. "Go back," Eleanor ordered. "You can barely stand. It is my house. Then try to remember the people inside it." She pushed open the panel, found the latch behind the iron cabinet, and entered the dark passage. Heat pressed against the walls. At the far end, Mrs. Finch was striking the hidden door from inside the archive. Eleanor released the bolt, and smoke burst through the opening. The housekeeper stumbled into her arms, followed by Mr. Ashcombe, whose hair had been singed and whose left hand was badly burned. "Is anyone else inside?" Eleanor asked. "One of the junior clerks," Mrs. Finch gasped. He collapsed near the windows. Price wrapped a wet curtain around his shoulders and went back with Julian. Eleanor tried to follow, but Ashcombe gripped her wrist. "No, you must hear this now." He pulled a scorched leather folder from beneath his coat. Bellamy set the fire after removing the canal papers. I saw him pour lamp oil across the lease shelves. When I protested, his men locked us inside. "Will you state that before Sir Matthew? If I live long enough." Ashcombe looked toward the chapel entrance. The authority document Julian signed contained 3 attached orders. One released the northern property, one authorized your confinement and treatment, and one named Arabella, temporary beneficiary of the Blackwood private estate, if you died before the separation was complete. Eleanor's suspicions became a hard, terrible truth. My death would dissolve my father's trust. Not lawfully. Your father anticipated an attempt against you. The trust passes to a charitable board if you die without freely naming a beneficiary before 2 independent witnesses. But Bellamy stole the sealed instruction and prepared a false amendment, making Blackwood, and therefore Arabella after marriage, the beneficiary. Did you write the words transfer upon death? Shame entered his face. I drafted the instrument, believing His Grace had obtained your consent. Arabella showed me a letter bearing your signature. You knew I had not signed it in your presence. I chose not to ask. Ashcombe's admission did not excuse him, but it made him useful. Eleanor took the folder. Inside were 3 scorched pages, a list of payments from Harcourt and Vale to Bellamy, and a preliminary map of the canal route. The decisive evidence was no longer confined to a single ledger. It connected motive, money, and land. A crash sounded from the archive. Price emerged through the passage, dragging the unconscious clerk, and Julian followed with one arm around him. Smoke blackened the Duke's face, and blood ran from a cut above his brow. He looked at the folder in Eleanor's hands, then at Ashcombe. What have you given her? What I should have shown you before you signed, the solicitor replied. Miss Vane and Bellamy have been using your authority to seize the northern land. Julian stared at him. Arabella has no interest in the canal. She owns shares in Harcourt and Vale through her mother's trust. Ashcombe coughed violently. The advance was never intended to rescue Blackwood. It was designed to place the estate in default. Once Bellamy transferred the farms and burned the payment records, the creditor would claim the canal corridor. And Eleanor, Julian asked, though dread already filled his face. Her death was meant to make the transfer permanent. A scream rose from the garden. Servants scattered as part of the archive roof collapsed, sending sparks into the night. Bellamy had arrived from the lodge and now stood beside Arabella, near the waiting creditor's carriage. When he saw Ashcombe alive, he seized Arabella's arm. "We leave now." Julian stepped toward them, but Eleanor caught his sleeve. "If you confront them without securing the evidence, they will blame the fire on me. They tried to kill you, and you gave them the order that placed me in their hands." He recoiled as if she had struck him. "I did not know what Bellamy attached, because you refused to read it." Julian looked toward Arabella. The woman he had defended before the entire county was climbing into a creditor's carriage, while his archive burned behind her. He could command the gates closed, but Harcourt's men controlled the inner yard, and Bellamy still possessed papers bearing the Duke's signature. One careless arrest would allow them to claim that Julian was trying to escape a lawful debt. Eleanor opened the scorched folder and removed the payment list. "Mr. Ashcombe, who witnessed these entries?" "Harcourt's cashier and Bellamy's junior clerk." "The junior clerk we just rescued." He nodded. Eleanor turned to Price. "Carry him to Reverend Cole's schoolhouse. Mrs. Finch, go with them and take Mr. Ashcombe. No one from Blackwood is to examine or separate these witnesses until Sir Matthew arrives." Julian reached for the folder. Eleanor stepped back. "You no longer control the evidence." Pain crossed his face. "I am trying to help you. Then begin by obeying a condition you did not write yourself." She gave the payment list to Mrs. Finch and kept only the canal map. "Have Reverend Cole record the condition of every page and every injury. Clara has the altered ledger. Mr. Fenwick is bringing certified bank deposits. For the first time, Bellamy cannot control all the records in one place." Arabella's carriage rolled toward the gate. Julian looked after it. "You are letting her escape." "No, I am letting her believe the fire destroyed the proof." Eleanor pointed to 3 circled farms on the canal map. Each corresponded to one of the false receipts Bellamy's men had dropped. Beside them appeared dates of payments scheduled for the following morning. Arabella must attend Harcourt and Vale's creditors' meeting to complete the transfer. If she fails to appear with your signed authority, she loses the canal corridor. That is her deadline and her weakness. Julian's shoulders sagged as the full weight of his choice settled upon him. "What do you require of me?" "Nothing tonight. Your word protected her and condemned me. Tomorrow, words will not be enough." Eleanor walked toward the servants preparing wagons for the schoolhouse. She would not return to the hunting lodge, and she would not remain under Julian's roof. The schoolhouse would become her base, guarded by the tenants whose homes she had defended. As she climbed into the first wagon, Julian followed and placed his coat around her smoke-stained shoulders. Eleanor removed it and handed it back. "You chose whom to cover when I came out of the lake," she said. "Do not pretend a coat can reverse it." He stood silent while the wagon carried her away. Only when Blackwood House disappeared behind the smoke did Eleanor open the canal map again. In the lower corner, nearly erased by fire, someone had written a final instruction. "If the Duchess survives, discredit the witnesses through the physician." Dr. Mercer had not followed them from the lodge. He was already riding toward the schoolhouse by the northern road. Eleanor ordered the wagon driver to take the quarry path instead of the northern road. The longer route jolted over broken ground, but it brought them to the schoolhouse before Dr. Mercer could arrive. Inside, 19 tenant families crowded together beneath the low timber roof, their few possessions stacked beside benches and frightened children sleeping in their mother's arms. Reverend Cole had transformed the teacher's table into a writing station. Clara sat beside him, copying the altered ledger, while each tenant gave a statement of the rent paid, the date of payment, and the person who had received it. Mrs. Reed rose when Eleanor entered. "Samuel has not returned." Eleanor felt fear tighten around her ribs, but she kept her voice calm. "He is with Mr. Hale on the way to Ashbourne. They are carrying a message that may save every farm." She did not say that Bellamy's men guarded the roads, or that a 12-year-old boy had become the keeper of evidence powerful men were willing to kill for. Price arrived minutes later with Mr. Spenders, Ashcombe, Mrs. Finch, and the unconscious junior clerk. The young man's name was Daniel Pike. His breathing was shallow, and a bleeding wound marked the back of his head. Reverend Cole placed him near the fire and sent a farm boy to fetch the retired army surgeon, who lived beyond the quarry. Ashcombe set the scorched folder upon the teacher's table, and Mrs. Finch described how it had remained beneath his coat from the archive to the schoolhouse. Reverend Cole wrote down each transfer and asked everyone present to sign or make a mark. Eleanor understood the importance of that simple act. Bellamy could accuse one witness of lying. He could not easily explain away a chain of custody observed by an entire room. Hoofbeats sounded outside before the record was complete. Dr. Mercer entered, carrying his leather case, accompanied by Sir Matthew's clerk and 4 armed constables. By order of the Duke of Blackwood, I am here to examine the Duchess and every person injured in the fire, he announced. Eleanor stepped between him and Daniel. You attempted to force laudanum upon me less than an hour ago, because you were violent and confused. Mercer looked around the crowded room. Your behavior here confirms my concern. You have incited tenants against their lawful landlord, stolen estate papers, escaped supervision, and gathered vulnerable people under the influence of your delusions. The constables shifted uneasily. Mercer's attack was more dangerous than a direct accusation. If he declared Eleanor mentally unsound, every conclusion she had drawn from the records could be dismissed, and Julian might gain legal and social justification to control her movements. Examine the injured clerk if you are a physician, Eleanor said. You will not touch the evidence or administer any medicine without Reverend Cole observing. Mercer smiled. A clergyman does not govern medical necessity, nor does Miss Vane, yet you accepted her instructions. His smile vanished. The magistrate's clerk produced a folded paper. Her Grace is to be returned to the hunting lodge. Mr. Bellamy has also reported that the documents here were stolen immediately before the archive fire. Several tenants rose in protest. Eleanor raised her hand, and the room quieted. She could not allow anger to become the violence Bellamy needed. Who signed the order? She asked. His Grace. The clerk unfolded it. Julian's signature appeared at the bottom, but Eleanor recognized the uneven ink of the pages he had signed in the courtyard. Bellamy was still using the same bundle to create new authority. Read the date aloud. The clerk hesitated. This afternoon, before the fire, before I escaped the lodge, and before these papers were rescued. It cannot be an order responding to events that had not yet happened. Mercer stepped toward her. That is precisely the sort of fixation. Daniel Pike suddenly opened his eyes. He struck me, the clerk whispered. Every face turned toward him. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed not at Mercer, but at Mr. Ashcombe. The solicitor staggered back. Daniel, no, I pulled you from the archive. You struck me, Daniel repeated. You set the fire. Ashcombe's face collapsed in disbelief. Mercer knelt beside the young man before Reverend Cole could intervene. Do not distress yourself. Tell us what the Duchess promised you. Eleanor saw the unnatural width of Daniel's pupils and the greyness around his lips. Someone had already drugged him. Mrs. Finch insisted that Daniel had been unconscious throughout the journey, but Price remembered Mercer leaning into the wagon while everyone rushed to remove Ashcombe. The physician had used those few seconds to place something beneath Daniel's tongue, then arrived at the schoolhouse ready to shape whatever confused accusation followed. Do not answer him, Eleanor said. Mercer turned to the constables. You see, she is preventing a witness from speaking. Daniel convulsed. Reverend Cole pushed Mercer aside, and the retired surgeon arrived at that moment carrying a worn medical bag. He smelled Daniel's breath, examined his eyes, and found a small blue residue between the young man's teeth. This is not smoke sickness, he said. He has been given a preparation of henbane. Mercer rose. Absurd. Then open your case. You have no authority. Sir Matthew entered behind the constables. He had followed the fire wagons from Blackwood and heard the last exchange. I have enough authority to ask why a supposedly injured witness has poison in his mouth. Mercer seized his case and moved toward the door, but Price blocked him. When a constable opened the bag, they found laudanum, henbane, blank medical certificates, and a letter bearing Arabella's seal. The letter instructed Mercer to certify that Eleanor suffered from hereditary madness and that any statements made by survivors of the archive fire were the product of smoke-induced confusion. Sir Matthew ordered the physician detained. For one brief moment, hope moved through the schoolhouse. Then Daniel's breathing stopped. The retired surgeon worked desperately, but the dose had been too strong. The young clerk died before he could correct the accusation against Ashcombe. or reveal what he had seen in the archive. Mercer refused to speak. Ashcombe's innocence remained uncertain, and Arabella's letter named no crime beyond a fraudulent diagnosis. The fragile proof had survived the fire, only to become tainted by a dead witness's final words. Dawn approached, and with it, the creditors' meeting at Harcourt and Vale. Eleanor spread the surviving documents across the teacher's desk, searching for another path. The canal map proved motive, but not ownership. Bellamy's payment list could be dismissed as Ashcombe's fabrication. The altered ledger showed fraud, but did not prove who replaced the pages. Mr. Fenwick had not arrived, and neither had Samuel or Mr. Hale. If the bank records were intercepted, Arabella would enter the meeting with Julian's signed authority and claim the entire northern corridor before noon. Outside, horses approached again. Julian entered alone, without coat or hat, smoke still darkening his collar. Every tenant fell silent. Mrs. Reed turned her face away from him. "The northern granary has been emptied," he said. "Bellamy's men removed the winter grain under the authority I signed. Harcourt and Vale now claims the estate failed to meet the repayment terms, though the supposed advance was issued only yesterday." Eleanor looked at him. That was always their purpose. They created the default themselves. "I know." His voice broke on the admission. "Arabella has gone to Ashbourne. Bellamy is with her. Then you should prepare to lose the farms you handed them." Julian placed a leather portfolio upon the desk. "I can stop the meeting by declaring that my signature was obtained through fraud." Ashcombe shook his head. "Not without admitting that you signed blank or concealed pages and authorized actions against your wife without reading them. Harcourt will argue that your negligence does not invalidate their reliance. Then I will admit it publicly." Julian looked around the room at the families facing eviction. "Because of his decision, I will state that I accused Eleanor without examining the books, transferred authority to Arabella, despite warnings, and signed the order used to confine and drug my wife. I will surrender my position on the county council and accept an inquiry into my management of the estate." No one thanked him. The truth was costly, but it did not restore what he had destroyed. Eleanor studied his face and saw, perhaps for the first time, remorse without expectation. "Your confession may delay the transfer," she said. "It will not prove the rents were paid or that Arabella planned my death." "What will?" Eleanor looked toward the cold fireplace where Daniel's body lay covered. Then, at the damp white lily she had carried from the chapel and placed beside the scorched papers. The flower had wilted, but the dark blue thread remained caught upon its petal. She suddenly remembered Bellamy's coat in the courtyard, and the sleeve buttons fastened with black thread, not blue. The thread did not come from his livery. It came from the braided cord used to bind the estate's sealed duplicate registers. Each cord dyed blue and numbered before being stored. Someone had opened the cabinet with a register cord, leaving its fibers on the lily. Those cords were made by hand in the Blackwood laundry and dipped in a dye containing copper salts. Water deepened the color, but heat turned it green. Eleanor looked at the fire-damaged folder. Along its scorched edge lay a thin green filament. "They did not destroy every duplicate," she said. "They used one to enter the cabinet and carried another from the archive." Ashcombe stared at the filament. "The original death transfer register." Eleanor nodded. "Arabella believes it burned because the cord changed color in the fire. But the iron-bound box her men carried into Blackwood was not bringing documents inside. It was designed to remove them without anyone noticing." Julian understood. The box went with her carriage, and she must open it at the creditors' meeting to present your authority. Eleanor gathered the lily, the green filament, and the canal map. "We do not need to chase her or accuse her before she speaks. We need to make her open that box before witnesses and force her to identify a document she could not lawfully know existed." By 7 o'clock, Eleanor had arranged the schoolhouse as carefully as she once arranged Blackwood's accounts. Sir Matthew sent 2 constables ahead to secure the creditors' meeting room in Ashbourne, while Reverend Cole remained behind with Daniel Pike's body, Dr. Mercer under guard, and copies of every tenant's statement. The original altered ledger travelled with Clara in a locked parish chest. Mrs. Finch carried the scorched payment list. Mr. Ashcombe guarded the canal map, and Sir Matthew retained Mrs. Reed's receipt. No single person held enough evidence to destroy or change the case, and every transfer had been recorded before witnesses. Julian offered Eleanor his carriage, but she chose to ride in Reverend Cole's modest coach beside Mrs. Reed and 2 other threatened tenants. If Arabella saw the Duke and Duchess arrive together, she might refuse to open the iron box. She needed to believe. Julian remained ashamed, Eleanor remained accused, and Bellamy's plan remained hidden. Harcourt and Vale occupied an imposing brick building opposite the Ashbourne Assembly Rooms. By the time Eleanor arrived, local landowners, investors, solicitors, and several members of the county council had gathered to witness the transfer of the northern farms. Arabella stood at the head of a polished table, wearing Eleanor's emerald brooch and carrying the household keys at her waist. Bellamy waited beside the iron-bound box, while Mr. Harcourt, a silver-haired creditor with cold blue eyes, reviewed the document bearing Julian's signature. The Duke of Blackwood has authorized Miss Vane to discharge the existing trust and pledge the northern properties as security, Harcourt announced. Upon confirmation of the tenant arrears and the Duchess's incapacity, the transfer will become effective. Eleanor entered at the word incapacity. Every voice in the room died. Her gown still bore smoke stains. A bandage covered her injured palm, and the bruise on her back made each step painful. But she walked to the center of the room without lowering her head. Arabella's surprise lasted only a second. This woman escaped lawful supervision after setting fire to her husband's archive, she said. She is not fit to participate. Then you should have no difficulty proving that before the magistrate, Eleanor replied. Sir Matthew entered behind her. Arabella's gaze moved to him, then to Ashcombe and Mrs. Finch. When she saw both fire witnesses alive, her hand tightened around the keys. Bellamy whispered something to Harcourt, but the creditor raised one finger for silence. Your Grace, he said to Eleanor, this meeting concerns debts incurred by the Blackwood estate. Unless you possess a valid interest in the properties, you have no standing here. My father's trust is the interest you are attempting to erase. We have an amendment bearing your consent. Bellamy opened the iron box and withdrew a parchment tied with a blue cord. Eleanor heard Clara inhale behind her. The cord had survived because it had not been inside the burning archive. Arabella had removed the death transfer register before setting the fire, exactly as Eleanor suspected. Bellamy placed the parchment before Harcourt. The Duchess signed this amendment voluntarily 3 weeks ago. Did you witness her signature? Sir Matthew asked. Mr. Ashcombe did. Every face turned toward the solicitor. Ashcombe stepped forward, his burned hand wrapped in linen. I witnessed a signature presented to me as hers. I did not witness the Duchess write it. That failure was mine. A convenient revision, Arabella said, made after Lady Eleanor persuaded you to steal documents and burn the archive. She presented Daniel Pike's final accusation as though it settled everything. The junior clerk named Mr. Ashcombe as the man who struck him and set the fire before dying. A murmur moved through the room. Eleanor allowed it to grow. Arabella attacked first because she believed the dead witness had poisoned every statement Ashcombe might give. Daniel Pike had henbane beneath his tongue, Eleanor said when the room quieted. Dr. Mercer's case contained the same preparation, and your written instruction to declare the witnesses confused. Arabella laughed softly. The letter requested medical care after a fire, nothing more. You also instructed him to certify that I suffered from hereditary madness. Your conduct at the garden party made such concern reasonable. My conduct was to survive being pushed into a lake. Several people who had attended the party lowered their eyes. One elderly lord spoke from the back. I saw Miss Vane standing behind the Duchess immediately before she fell. You saw confusion, Arabella replied, repeating Julian's earlier lie. His Grace himself confirmed it was an accident. The doors opened. Julian entered wearing plain black, without the ducal sash he usually wore at county proceedings. He did not approach Eleanor. Instead, he stood before the assembled landowners and addressed Sir Matthew. I lied. Arabella went still. I saw Miss Vane push my wife. I called it an accident because I intended to separate from Eleanor and marry Arabella. I valued my pride and my desire above the truth. The confession moved through the room like a sudden wind. Julian continued before anyone could interrupt. I also accused the Duchess of falsifying accounts without examining the bank deposits. I transferred authority to Miss Vane and Mr. Bellamy after being warned that the ledgers had been altered. I signed documents I refused to read because I wanted to prove that my wife no longer governed Blackwood. Every order used to remove, confine, or medicate her bears my signature. Whether I understood the hidden pages or not, I made their crimes possible. Arabella stared at him with open hatred. You pathetic fool. You will lose your seat, your credit, and perhaps your estate. Yes, Julian said. Those are consequences I earned, but you will not use my title to murder my wife. Harcourt pushed back his chair. This confession may establish negligence, but it does not invalidate a signed transfer or prove Miss Vane forged the amendment. If the Duchess consented, the northern property remains available as security. Then examine the original trust, Eleanor said. Bellamy placed one hand upon the parchment. This is the original. No, it is the death transfer register, stolen from the chapel cabinet. Shio! She laid the wilted white lily upon the table, the dark blue thread still caught in its petal. You used the register's binding cord to pull open a damaged lock. The wet fibre remained on the flower you left to threaten me. Another strand was found upon the folder removed from the burning archive. Bellamy recovered quickly. A thread proves nothing. A loan, no. But your register contains knowledge Arabella could not possess unless she had read my father's missing instruction. Eleanor turned toward Arabella. You claim I signed this amendment willingly. Tell the room what property it transfers upon my death. Arabella glanced at Bellamy. The northern farms, all 19. Yes. To whom? To the Duke of Blackwood, as your husband and lawful beneficiary. Eleanor nodded as though conceding the point, then opened the final page and read the beneficiary clause aloud. Harcourt untied the blue cord. Arabella reached for the document, but Sir Matthew stopped her. The creditor turned the parchment to its final sheet and frowned. There is no clause naming the Duke. It names the Blackwood Widows' Trust. Because she changed it, Arabella snapped. That is not the document I saw. Silence fell. Eleanor had forced the lie. No one had told Arabella there was more than one version, yet she had just admitted seeing a different register. When did you see it? Eleanor asked. You claimed moments ago that this was the original amendment bearing my consent. Arabella's eyes moved toward the door. The constables stepped in front of it. Bellamy seized the iron box and attempted to close the lid, but Price caught his arm. During the struggle, a hidden compartment sprang open beneath the false base. Inside lay Eleanor's father's sealed letter, 7 missing rent receipts, Bellamy's red brick counting-house key, and a second parchment bound with green-stained cord. Mr. Ashcombe stared at its seal. That is the forged amendment I drafted from Miss Vane's instructions. Harcourt lifted it carefully. The page named Julian as beneficiary upon Eleanor's death, permitted the immediate transfer of the northern farms, and bore a signature resembling Eleanor's. Arabella straightened despite the constables surrounding her. A signature is still a signature. The Duchess cannot prove she did not write it. Eleanor looked at the final line, then at the emerald brooch Arabella had taken from her rooms. Her father had built one last safeguard into every document involving his daughter's trust, a safeguard no forger could imitate, because it was never written in ink. Eleanor removed the white lily from the table and placed its damp stem across the signature. Slowly, beneath the moisture, a pattern of tiny silver marks began to emerge from the paper. Sir Matthew leaned closer, but Eleanor raised her hand before he could speak. The marks would reveal not only that the signature was false, but exactly who had held the original paper while the forgery was made. The silver marks spread beneath the wet lily stem in a pattern of tiny waves surrounding Eleanor's name. Her father had commissioned the paper from a mill that mixed powdered silver into the final layer and pressed each sheet against a private watermark plate. Ordinary ink remained unchanged when dampened, but pressure from a hand warmed the silver particles and left a faint impression, visible only when water touched the page again. Eleanor lifted the lily, and 4 narrow finger shapes appeared beneath the forged signature. One bore the unmistakable outline of a heavy ring with an oval stone. Every eye in the room turned toward Arabella's right hand. She wore an emerald ring of precisely that shape, the matching piece to the brooch she had taken from Eleanor's apartments. "Remove the ring," Sir Matthew ordered. Arabella closed her fist. A constable stepped forward and pulled it from her finger. When pressed beside the silver impression, the oval setting and chipped lower edge matched perfectly. "She held the paper while someone copied my signature," Eleanor said. "The marks also prove the document was not signed freely at a desk. My hand would have rested above my own name, not Arabella's beneath it." Bellamy backed away from the table. Miss Vane gave me the document already signed. I knew nothing of this. Eleanor opened her father's recovered letter. The seal broke with a soft crack that seemed louder than the arguments around them. Inside, her father explained that he had discovered Harcourt and Vale quietly purchasing interests along the proposed canal route years earlier. He had therefore placed the northern farms beyond the reach of Blackwood's ordinary creditors and created the silver watermark to expose any forged amendment. The trust could be altered only by Eleanor's signature before 2 independent witnesses, followed by a coded entry in the Ashbourne Bank's tidebook. "There is no coded entry," Mr. Fenwick announced from the doorway. He entered with Mr. Hale and Samuel beside him, their clothing covered in quarry dust. The bank manager carried a locked dispatch case containing certified copies of every tenant deposit. But there are 19 entries, proving that each threatened family paid its rent in full. "Missus," Reed rushed forward and embraced Samuel. The boy had hidden Eleanor's message inside his boot, while Bellamy's men searched him at the quarry road, then crawled through a drainage tunnel to reach Ashbourne. Mr. Fenwick placed the bank records beside the altered ledger. Each payment matched the original figures pressed faintly into the replacement pages, and every deposit had been collected by Bellamy or one of his agents. Harcourt's expression hardened. "You represented these farms as being in default." Bellamy looked toward Arabella. "She promised me a share of the canal profits." "Liar," Arabella said. "You devised the entire arrangement. You forged the Duchess's name. You ordered Mercer to poison her and Pike. You pushed her into the lake when she found the transfer paper in your reticule." The accusations burst from him in panic, each one revealing another part of the scheme. Arabella had planned to use Julian's resentment toward his capable wife to remove Eleanor's authority. Bellamy altered the rents and stole the receipts. Harcourt's advance created an artificial default. Ashcombe, through cowardice and greed, drafted the false amendment without verifying consent. Mercer was hired to certify Eleanor's madness or ensure she never woke from the hunting lodge. The garden party provided the final opportunity. If Eleanor drowned, Arabella would claim the fall had been accidental. The forged death transfer would release the trust, and Julian, already committed to marrying her, would unknowingly carry the stolen land into their union. When Eleanor survived, they shifted from murder to public disgrace, expecting Julian's pride to accomplish what the lake had not. Sir Matthew ordered Arabella, Bellamy, and Mercer held for conspiracy, forgery, attempted poisoning, arson, and the death of Daniel Pike. Harcourt surrendered the transfer documents and agreed to testify in return for a separate inquiry into his firm's conduct. Ashcombe was not spared. Though he had rescued evidence and finally told the truth, he had prepared a deadly instrument without witnessing Eleanor's consent. He resigned his practice, submitted himself to professional and criminal investigation, and used his remaining funds to provide for Dan's widowed mother. Julian stood apart while the room absorbed the truth. No constable approached him, but his consequence was written across every face that refused to meet his. He had not planned the crimes, yet he had supplied their authority at every decisive moment. Before the creditors, tenants, servants, and county gentlemen, he repeated his confession in full. He withdrew his accusation against Eleanor, acknowledged that her management had saved Blackwood for years, resigned from the county council, and surrendered control of the private estate to independent trustees until every account could be examined. He also signed a formal settlement restoring Eleanor's marriage portion, granting her separate maintenance, and placing the northern farms permanently under a board chaired by Eleanor and elected representatives of the tenant families. The evictions were cancelled before noon. The recovered grain was returned, the damaged archive rebuilt from Julian's personal funds, and Daniel Pike's family received an annuity drawn not from the estate, but from the Duke's unentailed property. Months later, the canal bill passed, making the northern land immensely valuable. Eleanor used the increased rents not to enrich Blackwood House, but to establish a school, a widow's fund, and a tenant bank that no steward could secretly control. Julian wrote to her each week from the smaller southern residence he had chosen after leaving the main house. He never asked for forgiveness. He reported what he had repaired, named what remained unpaid, and accepted silence when she did not answer. At the end of winter, he requested one meeting beside the restored lake. Eleanor arrived alone. The garden where Arabella had pushed her now belonged to the charitable trust and stood open to the tenant families. Children ran along the water's edge, while Mr. Hale planted white lilies near the stone border. Julian waited without title, escort, or expectation. "I loved being admired more than I loved knowing the truth," he said. "When you needed me to see you, I chose the lie that made me feel powerful. I cannot ask you to forget the water, the accusation, or the order I signed." Eleanor looked at the lake. "You did not lose me when Arabella pushed me. You lost me when I rose, and you called her violence an accident." He lowered his head. "I know. What you repaired was owed to the people you harmed. It was not a price for my return. I know that too." Eleanor removed her wedding ring, the same ring she had worn beneath the water, and placed it in his open palm. "Our separation will remain. Blackwood may one day forgive its duke. I will not return as his wife." Grief crossed Julian's face, but he closed his fingers around the ring and did not try to stop her. Eleanor walked to the edge of the lake, where Mr. Hale handed her the first white lily from the new garden. Months earlier, a lily dripping with lake water had been left as a threat inside an emptied cabinet. Now Eleanor planted one with her own hands beside a brass plaque bearing Daniel Pike's name. Behind her, Julian departed alone. Before her, the children of the restored farms carried books toward the school she had built. Eleanor rose from the earth, brushed the soil from her palms, and walked with them toward the future she had chosen for herself.